The mainstream media is spinning over former President Donald Trump. Of course, after his conviction, those on the left appear to be salivating over the verdict that found Trump guilty on 34 counts in his so-called hush money trial.
If you don't want to be found guilty of falsifying business records as a felony, don't sleep with the porn star. Don't lie about it. Don't pay her off. Don't cover up the payoff. Don't cover off the payoff in the middle of a presidential campaign where you're making an illegal contribution, and don't roast the guy up for taxes who used as the front man. If you don't want to be held liable for rape like Donald Trump has, don't grab the woman's genitalia. If you don't want to be held liable for defaming the woman that you raped, don't keep lying about what you did. Donald Trump is not the victim here.
This case was brought in a state that no Republican controls. Because if it did, the same thing that happened in Georgia would have happened here. Thank God for the state of New York, Donald Trump's home state, because there was no way for him to interfere with the process of justice. And in this rare instance, as somebody who's quite critical many times of the criminal justice system, the system actually worked.
I just thought there would be one out of 12 jurors that would have said, no, not going to go along with it. We're going to drag this thing out forever. So I was surprised by the quickness of it. I was surprised by the resounding 34 of 34. What do you all think happened in there that moved the dynamic in such a dramatic way against Donald Trump?
Who's first?
Lisa, I'll start with you.
Well, Joe, I think what happened is evidence happened.
An exchange between attorney George Conway and CNN contributor Scott Jennings got even more heated.
Scott's lying, and that's the problem with the Republican Party. It is continually addicted to lies.
Wait a minute. What am I lying
You're
about?
You're lying, Scott. You're lying about the law. You're lying about what the jury was charged to find. They don't have to find an underlying crime. They had to find the intent to cover up an underlying crime.
And here's what some were saying on the right.
I have a travel advisory for New York City. If you're a conservative or a Republican or a Trump supporter, beware. In the weaponized Biden criminal justice system, well, political differences are now considered especially heinous. And if New York's powerful Democrats hate your politics, well, a prison cell might well be in your future, or some kind of conviction for something, well, that they make up. Without a second thought, well, these Democrats, they'll make up a crime, conduct a show trial, rig a conviction with a handpicked Biden-donating judge, regardless of the evidence, if they could even explain it. And just hours ago, the former president of the United States, now running for a second term, Donald J. Trump, was convicted on all 34 felony counts and will be sentenced, just a few days before the Republican convention. How convenient.
The point that we've been saying, that this is not fair. This is not what this country should be doing to its political leaders, past and present. And then when you see it happen, and when you see it celebrated, and you hear laughter from the reporters at somebody who's just been convicted of 34 felonies, and I said this in the trial, but it's true. President Trump is an amazing man. He's president, he's running for president, and he has a public persona. He's also a husband, a father, a grandfather, and a friend to a lot of people. And so when you see that happen to him, and I was standing right next to him today, and it's heartbreaking.
The number of people who say to me, they can't imagine how he's been able to stand up and take this kind of a beating and keep coming. I think he's now a bigger figure than he was when the trial started, and it's one of the things the left doesn't understand. I also think that the depth of the corruption is going to change things. And by the way, it doesn't solve any of Biden's problems.
Manhattan papers were covered in Trump's face this morning, but they weren't all saying the same thing, as you can see right here on the screen. So, of course, there's a difference of opinions among people reacting to this. To say that the crime was made up, I think, is a bit of a stretch from Hannity there, of course. The jury reviewed the evidence. The jury convicted him. You can't make up a crime and get a judge that you like and get a conviction. There was a jury that deliberated for 2 days on this, and there has been a lot of reporting from the right that the jury instructions were not what they were from the judge. Namely, people are saying that the jurors had to agree unanimously that Trump committed a crime by engaging in a criminal conspiracy to falsify records with the intent to commit one or more other crimes to convict him. But actually, jurors can choose, from 3 options about whether what those crimes, the other crimes were: violations of the FEC, falsification of other business records, or a violation of tax laws. Now, those unlawful means aren't charges in themselves. They wouldn't result in separate convictions, so jurors don't have to unanimously agree on them. This is coming from NBC News because the judge, Merchant, is receiving a bunch of threats because of how he instructed the jury. But it sounds like there's a correcting of the record here that actually, Fox News, along with other outlets, are wrongfully reporting on this or falsely reporting on it.
I don't think they falsely reported on it. That's exactly what we said in an earlier segment, which is that they do have to unanimously agree that Trump falsified the business records in furtherance of covering up another crime, but that they don't have to agree on what the predicate crime was. And I think it's understandable that people would take issue with that. It's, I think, kind of a weird legal theory that you can say that someone tried to cover up another crime, but you don't have to prove that they committed that crime or that the jury has to agree on what that crime was. It does seem bizarre to me, but some of what the liberal commentators were saying were interesting as well. I'll take it from the other side. George Conway, for example, was going on this rant about how, well, if you don't want to be charged with this, then don't do the crime and then you don't have to worry about it. But we have seen an explicit double standard, specifically in this case with the falsifying of business records to basically commit a campaign finance violation. This was actually precisely what Hillary Clinton was accused of doing in 2015 when she paid Perkins Coie, her law firm, to conduct opposition research against the former president. This was how the Steele dossier came about. Perkins Coie paid Fusion GPS, who paid Christopher Steele, to put together the Russian dossier, which was then shot to the FBI and the media and used to open a years-long investigation into former President Donald Trump. And when it was discovered that she had marked that opposition research money as legal funds, the FEC basically just charged her a $100,000 fine. They didn't even bother with charging her with the misdemeanor of falsifying business records, nor did they obviously couple this with the idea that she was covering up a campaign finance violation to elevate it to the level of a felony.
Right. I think the confusion there is that a Fox News anchor put in a post on X that Merchant told the jury, quote, that they do not need to be unanimous to convict Trump. I think the confusion there is, the judge instructed the jurors that they need to find him guilty of one or more other crimes. And whether or not they were unanimous about what those crimes were, that he convicted all of them, that there was confusion around that. Merchant instructed the jurors, quote, they must conclude unanimously that a defendant conspired to promote or prevent the election of any person to public office by unlawful means. And he added that they need not be unanimous as to what those unlawful means were.
Don't you think that's problematic, though, that they don't have to prove or even agree on what the predicate crime was?
I think because there were a multitude of crimes he was accused of, if the law is that you're guilty of one or more other crimes, and there are multiple crimes that the jury could believe he was guilty of, if they believe he was guilty of at least one or more other crimes and there's a list to choose from, I think that's fine.
Okay. Joy Reid also said in her comments that Donald Trump, she was glad that it took place in his home state of New York because he couldn't interfere with the process. And I was curious as to what she meant by that. Do you think Trump has tried to interfere in other processes? I just am not sure what her point was.
Yeah, I can't speak to what, she believes. I don't know what her point was.
Not many people can.
Yeah, I'm not sure what her point was there. I did like in a part of her commentary, she points out this is Trump's home state. there are a lot of people who are like, oh, New York is such an unfair place for him to be tried. Obviously the odds are stacked against him. It's important to say, this is Trump's home state. This is where he lives. I thought it was good that she added that.
Yeah, but to be fair, it is in a Manhattan jury pool, which is 92% voting for Biden, I believe, in 2020. So just because of this being such a politically charged case, I think you should expect that you would get some fairness on the jury in terms of the fact that he is such a polarizing figure. The people who voted against him really do despise this guy. And he did request moving this to a different jurisdiction that might be more politically equal or stratified, I guess you could say. And he was denied that request. And one of the primary reasons why you would be allowed to move a trial to a different jurisdiction is because of an extenuating circumstance. And I think this absolutely qualifies as an extenuating circumstance. You have a guy who is actively running for president of the United States, who has previously run in 2 elections and won one of them, and then you have a jury pool that is 90% voting against him. That to me is an extenuating circumstance and does absolutely lead to either at least the perception, if not the possibility, that the jury very much was stacked against him.
I think it would be very amazing for someone whose boss was making the case you just made for them to say, well, I have to miss work. It's an extenuating circumstance. It turns out I've announced my run for president, so I can't be here. I think extenuating circumstances have to be a medical condition or a family member you're responsible for taking care of and there's no one else to take care of them. I think it has to be a matter that's very serious. Running for president, it's a serious thing. But when you think about these kinds of extenuating circumstances that you need to stretch the law over, I assume it would be matters of illness, matters of life or death, very serious things like that.
Yeah, my point, though, is not that Trump shouldn't have to be in New York because he's running for president and needs to campaign or whatever, but just because the makeup of the jury pool, and obviously a very political case that has this guy who is actively running for office, should be a jury pool that is more representative of the American populace in terms of their opposition or support for Trump.
Yeah. I don't know. I just don't agree with that. I think when we're picking a jury, if this is your home state, your jury is going to be made up of the people in the district in which you live. That's how everyone is tried across the United States of America. I could say, my political views are more popular, not in North Carolina. I want to be tried in Manhattan, and the judge would laugh at me.
Right, but you're not 99% name ID like Donald Trump and actively running for president, where politics are inextricable from this case.
Yeah, I just don't think someone should be given deference under the court of law simply because they're someone who's a very rich, very powerful, recognizable person. I don't think the jury pool should be handpicked to either be, people likely to like him or not. I think a jury pool should be picked based on their ability to, assess the evidence presented to them, a jury of Trump's peers. And maybe he disagrees as to whether or not these people are his peers. They live very different lives to him, as many people in Manhattan do. But I just don't think that we should make special exemptions for very rich, very powerful guys who people know, because the jury might not like him that much.
But that is part of a criminal trial, though, is that the jury cannot already be poisoned against this individual. And that is, when you're talking about someone like Trump, who, by the way, the individuals who were investigating and prosecuting this case have been talking about it to the media for years. The idea that you're going to be able to get, in Manhattan no less, 12 jurors who have no prior idea of what the case is about, no predilections for or against Trump, that they're not going to be poisoned ahead of time, is just not, I think, comporting with reality. And I think we're giving way too much credit to the idea that a 90% pro-Biden constituency is going to be able to get those 12 jurors who have both not already made up their mind about the former president, but also are, you said a jury of his peers. That just doesn't track for me.
I don't know. When I think about identifying the jury as being anti-Trump because they're in Manhattan, I think about what voter turnout looks like in New York, and even among the registered voters, we're seeing 43% turning out in elections. So the idea that although the polling shows among registered voters, if you were to cast a ballot today, who would you vote for? I'd vote for Biden. Among the people who show up and cast a ballot on election day, it does seem like the city is this very, liberal place. But in reality, there's only a fraction of people who are registered to vote in New York, 13.1 million. Among those, 43% are actually participating in the political process. So to say the jury's poisoned against Trump assumes that the average person is very politicized and pays a lot of attention to what's going on in politics and knows a lot about Trump. And I just don't think that's reality in America or in Manhattan.
To be fair, though, on this jury, we did get to see what their media consumption habits were, and every single juror said that they read multiple news outlets on a daily basis to get their news, including the New York Times, the New York Post, the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal. Some even said they got their news from Facebook and X. I mean, very clearly, this is an informed jury. I think it'd be hard to believe that they read the New York Times on a daily basis and don't know anything about what's been happening with Trump. And then you have DA Bragg and his investigators. You have Michael Cohen on his podcast talking continuously about this case while Trump is under a gag order and supposedly not allowed to talk about it. He was fined thousands of dollars every single day for talking about the case when he left the courtroom. And then you have Michael Cohen making posts of Donald Trump in an orange jumpsuit behind bars, and at best he got was an admonishment from the judge to maybe tone it down a little bit, but he didn't get hit with a fine. He didn't get actually hit with a gag order by the judge. He wasn't threatened with jail time like Trump was. And I do think it's absolutely relevant that this judge, by the way, has a previous donation to the Biden campaign and that his daughter made almost $100 million for her clients. Her firm is explicitly a consulting firm for Democratic clients and fundraised off of this case on behalf of her Democratic clients. There's an obvious conflict of interest there.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are paying attention to the political leanings of judges and justices right now, and it has to be either Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito recuse themselves, and no judge can ever have political opinions, or we have to wholeheartedly accept that all judges have their own personal and political opinions. I don't think it can be both, and it feels like it is both right now for a lot of people. And I want to go back to what you said. If Trump's position is that an informed jury is a jury that is poisoned against him, that is a better joke than I could have written myself.
I disagree, because when we see the leaning of the mainstream media, if that is the consumption habit of a jury, then they're obviously only getting one side of the story. We know that in most corporate media outlets that the vast majority of their employees are either Democratic donors or registered Democrats. We can see, based on studies by the Media Research Center, that 90% of media coverage is negative against the former president. And even if you don't like the guy, the idea that there would be a 90% negative coverage rate against him obviously means that there is some implicit or obvious bias involved in the way that they cover him that would absolutely affect somebody who only reads one perspective from the media.
Yeah, we're going to have to agree to disagree on this one, but we've got more Rising after this.